Sean, welcome to my show. So happy to have you on M&A Insights. I know we met maybe a couple of weeks ago, and here we are going to talk about a bunch of things about your company. So really excited to have you on it.
Thanks a lot. Looking forward to spending some time talking to you today.
Awesome. Sean, can you give us some ideas about your professional background and what led you to start Synivate in 2009, right?
Yeah, so we actually started in 2011. So I started Synivate in 2011. We were doing really a hybrid approach there of, hold on, let me just redo, hold on. I'm trying to get something on my screen here so I can talk to you. So I'll just restart that. So I started Synivate actually in 2011. And so in 2011, we were doing a lot of voice, data, cabling work, phone system work, telephony, communications items, right? And so in 2011, Microsoft 365 had really just started. So, that's kind of to put it in perspective, right? Timing and what we were doing in 2011. And really that transitioned into, doing the voice and data cabling work, transitioned solely into doing more IT work. Of course, companies will ask, hey, you're sort of involved with the network, what else can you help with, right? And so that just slowly transitioned over time into doing more IT work. And then we took on our first managed service customer somewhere around 2015, 2014, 2015. And, from there, we just haven't really looked back, right? So it's been full managed services. We no longer, assist our customers directly with voice, data, cabling, PBX work. We subcontract that out or refer partners, trusted partners into the mix to help our customers out there. But, really, again, 2014, 2015 is when we really started that shift to, full managed IT services.
So it was about the same time that cloud was beginning to come into its own. I don't know whether it was starting to get called cloud then. Did you sort of ride that wave? That was that 2015, 16 kind of starting period wave, or did you gradually leg into it later?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, we really started, prior to bringing on that first fully managed customer, we started working with some customers in more of a hybrid approach, moving them into the cloud. Okay. So at the time, we were doing like a sort of, private cloud, right? So not necessarily, Azure or, we're really Rackspace and whatnot, doing a totally private, 100% dedicated cloud for customers, hosting applications, accounting systems, all LOB applications, ERP systems, so on and so forth. And then of course that transitioned into, a little bit of maintenance work and then managed services. But yeah, definitely cloud was a really big component to really get us into the mix there for sure.
And you're based out of, I think, a Boston suburb? Or...
Yeah, so we're in Sharon. So we're about 40 minutes south of Boston.
Yeah, and your client base, is it local to that region?
Most of our clients have sort of a headquarters, I would say, around here, but we have customers all across the U.S.
Yeah,
we have customers on the West Coast, customers down the East Coast, but yeah, for the most part, they all have a presence here in New England or Massachusetts. Yeah.
And Sean, what's the typical profile for your customer? Are these large enterprises? Are they small, medium-sized businesses? Any specific vertical?
Yeah, so a typical Synivate customer is going to be somewhere between 25 to 99 employees. That's the average, right? So there are definitely some below and some above that. But for the most part, 25 to 99 employees, SMBs, servicing businesses, it's all B2B work that we do. We don't tend to work much with, B2C. It's mostly a lot of service businesses that we interact with and that we support. We work with companies all across, so life science, digital media, contracting, business services. Really, we run the full gamut there.
Full gamut, yeah. Okay. So a bunch of years you've been doing this. Did you always know that this is what you wanted to do? Because I think this is your first career.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, I just personally have always been around computers. Always fascinated with technology and breaking things, taking them apart, putting them back together. So I think, sort of how things transpired for me at the beginning and starting Synivate, I was working for a company doing low voltage telecommunications work. and decided that I wanted to sort of go off on my own. And I felt that I could do a better job at it and provide a better service to companies. And so that was kind of the big thing for me, was time to just go off on my own and do it. But really that was sort of an opportunity, right? The opportunity was I had just fallen into this space, learning PBX, telco. And so, but really my passion was technology and IT. And so they kind of, work a little bit together, right? They're sort of complementary services there. So yeah, really just started doing that and then transitioned into IT. But I've just always been, around computers. I've always been the sort of IT guy for, friends and family before I started Synivate.
Right.
It's just kind of always, it's been in my blood, if you will.
Yeah. So many people talk about the challenges that they face when they try to grow their business. What were some of the key challenges you faced in growing your business, and what are some of the insights on that you can share with how you overcame them?
Yeah, so I think one of the big things there is just sort of at the beginning, it's sort of you're willing to do anything for a dollar, right? As a new business, do you need some consulting services? Do you want me to help, implement this system or that system? Do you want a little bit of managed services? Do you want some cybersecurity services? It's just there's just too many things that you could be doing, firewalls and networks, and really this is an industry where there's just so much, right? So you can come in and say, I want to do co-managed or managed services. And so there's, again, so many different options. And so that's definitely a big thing to take into consideration, right? Having a standardized approach that you're providing for customers really makes a lot of sense for both the customer and the organization, and of course the team who's supporting that and facilitating that whole life cycle, right? So standardizing and having a consistent approach to how you want to deliver those services for your customers makes a lot of sense. I mean, there are some MSPs out there that focus on, just co-managed and cybersecurity, right? So their core focus is not necessarily help desk. It's more so back-end cybersecurity, SOC, NOC operations, maybe VCIO services. There are some MSPs that are sort of tech help desk, sort of centric, right? And so they're providing help desk services. That's really their core focus. They might not be doing as much in terms of cybersecurity, best practice alignment, automation. And so I think really for us is really to just try to find the right companies that really can take advantage of all the services that we provide and we deliver. And so for us, it's a standard approach of everything that we feel a small business needs, from a support, help desk support, VCIO, security alignment, best practice alignment, digital transformation. It's just really trying to provide a fully inclusive service for companies that don't necessarily have, the person in the organization that they can trust to make the right decisions and sort of advise them on best practices and what they need to be doing.
Having clarity around product offering and having a proper approach, standardized approach towards product offering is, I think, some of the things that you mentioned there. We talk about operational maturity for MSPs a lot, and I think that this is a big piece of achieving that operational maturity, is to have a really clear service offering and a standardized approach to making that offering happen. At this stage, when you compare where you are today to where you were in the beginning, like, has your mix of like managed recurring revenue services improved over time, or where are you in that spectrum?
Yeah, so we're very, very high in terms of recurring revenue, as opposed to when you look at that ratio of recurring revenue to, one-time revenue, project revenue, we're very high. I mean, we're almost right at the max, right? So to put that into perspective a little bit for us, all of we work with a lot of different companies, right? But in reality, we only have a handful of customers. I can think of 2 or 3 that come to mind that have physical servers. Every single one of our customers is in the cloud. And so there's a lot less in terms of like professional services work for us to be doing for them. It's all recurring, right? So it's just monthly recurring work that we're doing for them, proactive, of course, and reactive as they need it, of course, more proactive. But yeah, it's all recurring. Whereas, there might be some MSPs out there that are working with companies that have a lot of physical servers, and those need to be life cycled. And so there's a lot of that comes into the mix. Of course, we're still doing life cycling for everything else, network, security, workstations, laptops, but when it comes to the core infrastructure, our approach has really been to try to move clients into the cloud. And we've come across a few companies that have the proper systems internal to be able to do it, redundant internet connectivity, having a data center on premise, all the things that you need to be able to check off to do it right and do it best to align with best practices. But most small businesses in that 25 to 99, employee space, it just makes sense to move to the cloud. So as a result of that, for us, it's all recurring.
Yep. I want to get into one of the key product offerings that you have, which is the cybersecurity piece. But before I go there, I want to spend 2 seconds on your approach for growing your business. Like, I want to think about sales and marketing and net new logo acquisition. Where are you? I mean, for a lot of MSPs, this is such a big nut to crack. They initially get some clients because of their friends and families, then they get some referrals. And then frankly, they have a hard time moving past that to a standardized lead generation funnel that produces growth for them. What has worked for you, and what are you doing around that whole area currently?
Yeah, so it's definitely a hot topic for discussion, for sure. It's something that comes up a lot in our peer group meetings. And so I've been in a peer group for several years now, and having access to other folks in the industry makes a lot of sense here when it comes to having these discussions around bringing on new customers and everything that goes along with it, right? But there isn't really a secret sauce here in terms of bringing on new business. There's just so many different avenues, right? So for us, what we found is that no matter what we've done, referrals are always the best. And so, yeah, of course, when you start referrals from friends and family, that's a big thing, right? But for us, for me personally, here at Synivate, when I got started, the biggest thing for us was referrals. But it's not just referrals from customers. It's referrals from centers of influence, right? So companies that are out there that, maybe for us, maybe it's a software company, right? Maybe it's an accountant that's selling QuickBooks solutions for his customers, and they need somewhere to host it. And so they need a secure system and a secure network. And he or she is telling them, well, do you have a good IT company? Oh, well, I have somebody that, comes in every once in a while and they fix our problems. Well, that's not a proactive IT company. You need to talk to this person, or you need to talk to this company.
Yeah.
So having that center of influence makes a lot of sense, for sure.
That's a great point. Centers of influence. I didn't have the same term, but I think your term is better. I used to call them node points in an ecosystem. Node points in an ecosystem, basically places where they just have lots of connections out to people you want to be able to reach out to, and they have influence over that. Totally agree with you. Okay, so let's turn a little bit to cybersecurity, right? Talk a little bit about that. Cybersecurity has become such a top priority for businesses today. How does Synivate approach cybersecurity for its clients?
Yeah, so I think for us, the big thing is taking a standardized approach. Again, talking to standardization and operational maturity. So when we bring on a company to work with us, right? So one of the first things that we do is align their core systems with our set of standards. So we might have 30 or so key items that we feel are sort of non-negotiable items when it comes to cybersecurity best practice. And so these are things like having endpoint detection and response. These are things like preventing local administrators on machines and making sure that there's a monitoring platform in place like SIEM, SOC, for your Office 365 authentication, making sure that you have conditional access policies in place, making sure that you're blocking users from installing potential rogue applications, whether those are on the workstations or, more importantly, in the Microsoft cloud environment. So for us, it's very straightforward. We've built a set sort of framework around what our customers need to be compliant in terms with our best practice standards, and really, really foundational high level items. And then from there, we sort of break out, right? So if a customer needs to be HIPAA compliant, we'll go ahead and implement the set of controls that need to be HIPAA compliant. If they need to align with ITAR or SOC or ISO, those are different types of controls. But at the core, they all sort of point back to best practices at a very high level. And so we've sort of adapted, some of the methodologies around, NIST standards, CIS standards. We've helped customers with all of these, right? So all of the compliances that are out there, we've been involved in it. And so we really try to take a little bit of all of that and implement it across the board, whether the customer needs to be compliant out of the gate or not. It's just good business, right? It's just a good practice.
Yeah. What happens when a customer looks at that menu of things that you say are the right things for them to have and pushes back? Or do
Yeah,
you
so
get pushback, actually? Do you get pushback?
we do. It's interesting because we have some customers that need to be compliant with the FDA, right? So FDA is a pretty big compliance. FDA is a pretty big compliance item, right? So they're dealing with drugs that people are inserting into their body, right? So it's pretty important. One of the things that they have it's interesting, is they call it, GMP, for good manufacturing practices, right? So it's like basically the FDA is saying, we want you to align with best practice, but we're also sort of leaving the door open to whatever it might be. We want you to sort of run a good business and do things right. And so there are a lot of controls around that, but there are a lot of things that they sort of leave open-ended, right? So we try to take the same approach, right? So we want you to align with best practices, not just because there's somebody here telling you that you have to align with best practices, but because, Mr. Customer, Mrs. Customer, you've built a great business. We want to help you protect that business, right? So you don't want to be a statistic. You don't want to stop, working for a day. You don't want to have to, look at your operational costs, payroll cost, and look at what your burden is and overhead is for having your team, not working for 2 or 3 days, let alone what the impacts are on the revenue side and the cost side of things. It makes a lot of sense to just invest in cybersecurity, really, is what it comes down to. But yeah, we do on occasion get pushback. I think for us, what we've realized is that we want to work with companies that care about cyber best practices, right? Because it's a lot easier for us to work together, because they understand and they respect that, hey, we want to do things right. We don't want to just implement the basic controls and just move on. We actually want to do things right.
Yeah. What do you think business leaders should be most concerned about looking forward 1 or 2 years as far as like threats in cybersecurity are concerned?
So I think there's just everybody thinks business leaders might not necessarily understand all of the small little changes and what's evolving in the cyber, threat landscape. They hear things in the news, they hear from peers and whatnot, but the reality is there's just it's constantly evolving, right? So there's always new threat vectors, and in order to stay on top of that, they really need to partner with somebody who understands it and who's spending their days researching this and staying ahead of things. So I think, for business owners out there, again, they really just, like, when we talk to a business owner, we don't necessarily like to spend the time boring them with all of the details and saying, we have this product, we have this product, we do this, we do that. We really just they just want to have a conversation and know that we're doing things in line with best practices, and really have that trust that we're going to do things the right way. And so, again, it really boils down to there's just a lot of trust there, for sure, between organizations, and knowing that we have a track record of helping organizations and keeping them protected and maintaining that moving forward, and really that's the end goal.
So I think what you're saying is that businesses will find it tough to keep up to speed with this changing landscape of threats and regulatory compliance needs. This is better off handled by those who understand IT, and as long as they're spending their time doing their homework on what's required, that is the MSP that's focused in this space. So look to them, find an MSP that you trust, who can do this for you right. I wonder whether even for MSPs, this is going to become a challenge, because there's going to be, I think, a decent amount of regulation coming down the pipe, in terms of cybersecurity. And I wonder whether every MSP that's in the market right now has the wherewithal, the resources, the ability, the energy to keep on top of everything. What is your thought about that? And B, if you had to design a regulatory framework and governing body for cybersecurity, how would you approach it?
Okay, great questions. So yeah, I do think a lot of MSPs out there are realizing that there's a lot to keep up with for sure when it comes to compliance and best practices. And so, a good item to talk about here is like, for example, the customers need to know that they're in line with best practices and want to hear about this. And I think what qualifies an MSP in order to be able to help them with that, it's not just necessarily having like a sort of VCIO. And we talk about quarterly business reviews and business meetings, and sort of the virtual CIO has been around for a very long time. But the question is not so much what you're calling it, but what you're actually doing during those VCIO meetings. And so we have a team member who's really dedicated to security and best practice alignment. He has a CISSP and he's a VCIO, but he's really more of a VCISO. And so organizations need to have that role in the company. If they want to align with best practices, they want to prevent cyber incidents, they want to run a good operation, they need to have a sort of CISO or a VCISO, right? So, okay, does it make sense for a company that's 25 to 99 employees to have a CISO? Probably not. Does it make sense even for a company that has 150-ish employees to have that role? Maybe not, right? So that's where we come in and provide that as sort of a fractional service, right? And so the MSPs that are providing that service, I think, are the MSPs that are sort of on the forefront of what we have coming up next year and following, really staying ahead of the curve, making sure that they're talking about the right things during those meetings.
Okay, and then from a regulatory, from a policy standpoint, if you take a step back, get your MSP hat off, put a government hat on, how do you think we should go about approaching this space?
So I think what we try to do is we start with the very first thing that we talk to a customer about is, do you have any, well, obviously we want to find out if they have compliance requirements. That's like number one, right? And so do you have compliance requirements? Okay, if yes, that's the framework that we're going to follow. And we're going to combine that with our in-house best practice alignment, right? And between the two, we've got a pretty solid system. If the customer says, well, and we hear this a lot, like we think we want to get SOC compliant in the future, or we think we are going to need this compliance, whatever it might be, at some point in the future, because we're looking to work with a new customer who's asking for it. And so we hear that a lot. So what we'll try to do then is really just try to fast track some of the high level best practice items that we think will really help move the needle and really kind of jump and cover that delta gap between where they're at and where they need to be. Yeah. And that's the first thing that we focus on, right? Like those are the big picture items that we want to handle. But I think the standards that I sort of talked about, a few minutes ago, about that we implement when we bring on a customer, that's sort of my answer, I guess, to your question here about, what are the frameworks that, if I had to build one, what would we build? I would say we kind of have already built a little bit of a best practice framework, and we've taken components out of the NIST framework, and we've taken components out of the CIS framework, and we've sort of blended them together. And so when we have this discussion, follow up to your prior comment about what if a customer, or a company they're working with says that, do we really need this, or do we want to do this? Yeah. That's where we take that framework that we've built, and we basically have referenced on every key item that we align our customers with. We reference whether it be NIST or CIS, and we say, here's the NIST recommendation, here's the CIS recommendation. The funny thing about it is that a lot of the NIST recommendations and the CIS recommendations, there's blurred lines there, right, between the two. And not only that, you could probably, with just a very high level recommendation of making sure that you have a solid written backup and disaster recovery plan, not just we have backups and we're watching them and what is the disaster recovery plan for the organization? That checks off 15 or 20 different boxes between both frameworks. And so again, our approach is trying to simplify that. Let's try to simplify it so that we're not running through a list of 500 items, and instead running through a list of 30 to 50 really high level items.
Okay, and so let's take this one step deeper. So in this model, the MSP does two things: makes a list of the compliance requirements from guidelines around, I don't know, HIPAA and things like that, right? And then on top of that, builds their own best practices and makes a recommendation to the business to carry out those things. Who checks the business to make sure that they are indeed compliant with all that stuff? I'm talking about the audit role here.
Yeah, so when it comes to sort of the business operational items, that's when we typically involve a third party to obtain a formal certificate of compliance, whether it's ISO or SOC. And those are typically done by, CPA firms that specialize in it. And they're audited on an annual basis. For customers that are HIPAA compliant, we'll work with a third party because it's the fox watching the hen house, right? We want to help them get compliant, but we don't necessarily want to give them that sort of check mark that says, here you go. It's best to come from a third party in our experience.
Yeah. Have you had conversations with cybersecurity insurance providers where they are saying, we are willing to provide insurance, but here are the standards that these guys need to meet for us to be able to provide this insurance?
Yes. So we get requests from customers all of the time. One of the biggest, most important items that we talk about in this sort of list of standards is, do you have cyber insurance? What does it cover? What is the renewal period? Send us a copy of the application. If it's a customer that we just started working with, we want, and their renewal isn't for 10 months, we still want to see the application that they completed because we want to make sure that the right controls are in place to align with that. So cyber insurance is a very important component of this. And I do think that we're sort of, we're due for a little bit of an industry disruption when it comes to cyber insurance. There are some companies out there that are doing some different creative things where they're monitoring, some of the access that the MSP has, and then they're sort of taking that in order to provide cyber warranties on top of the cyber insurance. You have companies that are providing, the actual cyber insurance and underwriting the cyber insurance and monitoring the system. So there's a lot happening in that space. And I think the common trend, the pattern is just cyber insurance keeps going up. I mean, it's not going down, it's going up. And it's not going up by 10% and 20%. In some cases, it's going up by 50%. So,
yeah. A concern for MSPs in the same space has been, listen, am I covered for liability, right, against anything that happens to the business that I am serving? In my MSA, have I very clearly laid out what I am responsible for and what I'm not responsible for? And is that lined up with the insurance that I have on my side, my coverage? Have you crossed that hurdle on your side? And if so, then how?
Yeah, so we have. And I think that's a great point to bring up for other MSPs that are listening. And I think it's very important because you need to have the right agreements in place for a variety of reasons. But we crossed this bridge many years ago with having an MSA, of course. We've had the agreements over the years, multi-page agreements. We really wanted to try to simplify that and create sort of an online published in, concrete, this is our MSA. And so when you agree to work with us, this is the MSA, this is what it covers, and this is what it states. But we have a sort of complementary statement of services document, which provides a little bit more clarity into each individual service and talks a little bit about that. So the MSA doesn't really change, and it hasn't changed in many years, but the statement of services might change, and we might add services and remove services. And a good example of that is, like Microsoft, right? So we provide Microsoft, we include it for all of our customers as part of our all-inclusive service offering. But of course, we're not necessarily responsible for, Microsoft terms of service, like the customer needs to, comply with the Microsoft terms of service. So we incorporate that in the statement of service. If anybody is listening and would like to hear more about it, definitely feel free to reach out. I can put you in touch with some folks that can help with the agreements. There are some really well-respected industry attorneys that this is all they focus on. And, we've worked with some over the years to really help us there.
Do you recommend that MSP should take advantage of some of the external vendors out there who would help with MSA standardization? Is that something that you use?
100%.
100%. Okay, good to
Yeah,
know.
agreed.
All right, because I do think that this is an area which they might trip over, and better to have someone who's who's doing this and as their full-time job to make sure that they're properly covered there. Let's take a
Agreed.
step back. How do you see the IT MSP space evolving in response to all these changes? And we haven't even talked about AI so far, but that's clearly a big topic as well. So cybersecurity, AI upon us, consolidation going on in the industry. How do you think the IT MSP space is going to evolve? And what is a risk you think we're not thinking enough about in this space?
Yeah, so to answer the risk question, I think the biggest risk to MSPs and in the space, I think we might be talking enough about it, but we might not, is really just the supply chain and the influence and impact that the supply chain has on MSPs. Most of us are working with, when you look at traditional, non-MSP businesses and you talk to business owners, they're like, how many vendors are you using? How many vendors are you working with that have access into systems and whatnot? And it's often a very short list. And so for MSPs, that number is pretty high, right? So we have security vendors and RMM systems and PSA systems and documentation systems. And so that's the biggest risk that MSPs face and that we need to stay ahead of, is making sure that we're having those discussions with our vendors. It's okay to ask, some of these big name vendors, hey, what is your security policy? What is your security framework? We should make sure that they're SOC compliant or ISO compliant, really high level items to just give us a little bit more peace of mind. So that's definitely one thing for sure that we should be talking about.
That's almost there's like a continuation of the theme that you were talking about before. It's just like now you take it up one bend on the river, further upstream in terms of the supply chain. Very good. Okay.
Right. And then I think your first question there was about sort of how it's changing and what we need to do. Yeah, I mean, I think, look, my take on this is that help desk support is the foundation of an MSP. So you need to be able to provide great support. It can and has become a little bit commoditized, right? So, I mean, every MSP out there is capable of providing support and reactive support, right? But not every MSP out there is capable of, providing the exact same result every single time. And so I think that's a big thing to look at. And so automation, and not just automation for the purpose of automating things, but process-driven automation. Process-driven automation is a big thing for us. And so we want to automate the things that really move the needle for our customers, like onboarding new employees. Obviously terminations, that's very easy, but more so onboarding new employees as an example. We want that process to be as simple as possible for the companies that work with Synivate, and we want it to be a consistent result for them every single time, adding them to the right groups, creating the right systems, firing off the right emails to the right folks, sending off welcome emails, sending them, knowledge-based articles on, for things that they need to know how to do on their first day. Again, process-driven automation for us, for sure.
Great point. Would you think that is also one of the differentiators for you as a IT service provider, providing this level of standardization for the onboarding process for your businesses, your clients?
I think so. Yep, 100%. Yeah, I would say so. And I think the companies that have been working with us tend to notice that, right? As they get started and they say, okay, we're getting great support. They might have been getting okay support before, but they're getting great support now. But more importantly, at a very high level, in addition to the security alignment and all of the other things that we're doing, that sort of process-driven approach of making sure that we're following the process every time through automation. Yeah, I do think it's a big differentiator for us.
Differentiator for you, okay. What are your growth plans for the next 3 to 5 years? Organic, inorganic? How is Synivate going to grow itself?
Yeah, so Synivate's continuing to build our sales team here for, just reaching out and extending our network and looking to bring on new business, of course. But that's, every MSP out there understands that can be challenging. It takes time to bring on new customers, and These are companies that tend to work with us for a very long time, on average 5 years or longer. And so it takes a long time to bring on those new customers, those new logos. So for us, we're continuing to do that. And we've had a very good last couple of years. But more importantly for us, the big strategy is going to be basically looking to do some acquisitions of similarly sized and smaller companies to Synivate. And so that will help us really fast track our growth and create opportunities for the customers and provide them with a much more holistic service offering and create opportunities for the employees. So it's a win-win for everybody involved. And so I think for us, strength in numbers, right? We talked about automation. We're very strong in terms of automation, and we have a very strong process-driven approach, but we're still a smaller team when it comes to the size of comparison to some of the MSPs that are out there. And so we want to be able to provide those services, just really strengthen numbers, right? So growing through acquisition will really help us provide that service to companies out there.
Any key things you want to point out to listeners in terms of the profile of the company that you're looking for, regional presence, size, vertical, tech stack, and then any things you would think might become deal breakers for you?
Yeah, so I think any MSPs that are out there, whether it be really small, MSPs, 1 or 2 person operations, and maybe they're looking to team up or they're looking to retire and potentially exit the space, all the way to several, maybe let's say, here, let me redo this take here. I just kind of lost my train of thought there. So I would say MSPs that are out there anywhere from 2 to say 99 employees, really just the full gamut there.
Okay.
Definitely feel free to reach out. It's worth a conversation. If anything, if nothing else, it's worth a conversation. We're looking to connect with companies, with MSPs in the New England area for the most part. So anybody that's here in the Northeast and Massachusetts, New Hampshire, up north, down into New York, Connecticut, definitely looking to talk with other MSPs that maybe a lot of the things that I've talked about today resonate with. I think that's the biggest thing, right? If you listen to this podcast and a lot of these things resonate, like automation and process, we definitely want to talk. Operational maturity, it's definitely something that is worth a discussion.
And what do you, so if there is, let's say, a $1 million, $2 million revenue company, 5 employees, 10 employees, do you have a plan for what the person would do in your organization? Or would you want to do a full integration and then that's that?
So I think it's sort of a case-by-case basis, right? Okay. So let's say we come across an MSP that is highly verticalized, right? So they're working with only they're really working in a single industry and that's all they do. It probably doesn't make sense to integrate that company right away or really at any point in the planned, future, right? Because it's all they're doing. Maybe we can leverage best practices together, share automation, so on and so forth. But I think it really depends it's up to the business owner, right? It's really up to them what they think makes the most sense. So when we have those first discussions, that's one of the big things is, what are some of the strong points? What are the things that you want to work on? And a lot of times we hear just general operational maturity at that size is something that we can help, fill the void on, and automation can help fill the void there. And then maybe they have certain processes on other sides of the business that we can leverage. And so, yes, it might make sense for an integration, but I think, just knowing that going into it is really important, and having that discussion. I talked to an MSP last month who really wanted to focus on sales, right? So they love talking to customers, having those first discussions, but don't like doing the engineering work, and they're kind of stuck, getting pulled into engineering work here and there. And so we would create an opportunity where their only focus, their goal is to get them into sales, right? And obviously we can fill the void on the engineering and pro services front there, but it's a case-by-case basis. I mean, we've got some companies that say, I want to retire in 6 months. I want to be out of here. And some that want to stick around. And so that's great. We want
Mhm.
business owners that want to stay around for
Mhm.
several years, if not for an indefinite period of time, because
Mhm.
we're going to be vested in this together.
Are you very stuck on the PSA? I know you guys are a ConnectWise shop.
We are a ConnectWise shop, but I mean, I wouldn't say we're, stuck on sort
Right.
of sticking with ConnectWise long term, but
Right.
right now it is working for us.
Yeah.
We're using Enable and Central
Yeah.
for our RMM, but I don't really want tools to be a determining factor
Okay.
in those discussions. And we've really tried to, when we have these discussions, yes, we want to understand what tools are being used,
Mhm.
but we don't want that to be the determining factor, right? If there's an MSP that's, leveraging, they have great customers, great employees, good owners, just everything is great, but they happen to be using a tool
Mhm.
that we know nothing about and we're not familiar with, and maybe we're not big fans of it. That's okay.
Okay.
We can get
Work
past
around
that.
that. Okay.
Yeah.
Look, I'll be honest, I've heard a lot of people, arguably the bigger guys, talk about the perils of doing bolt-on acquisitions because it takes a lot of time and energy and resources for an MSP to bring on another MSP and integrate them into the organization. And there's almost a period when it gets worse before it gets better. And sometimes people just get stuck in that worst situation before it never get better. Sean, have you thought about that, and do you worry about that?
Yeah, so it can be a point of concern, but I think the most important item is communication. So we've got customers. We have one customer that comes to mind that has been doing these bolt-on acquisitions for years, and we've had these discussions with them. And it's funny because they talk about this as well. And really, the big thing is just communicating this at the beginning, making sure the team understands. Look, things might get a little confusing for a short period of time, but here's what we're doing. Here's why we're doing it. Here's what the light is at the end of the tunnel, and here's why we're making this push this integration of the PSA or the RMM. And going back to a prior point that we had talked about here, what should MSPs be sort of focused on? What are some things that they should be concerned with and thinking about? And so that sort of supply chain risk factor of the PSAs and, more importantly, the RMMs, having that centralized and allowing us to dedicate resources to securing that and implementing best practices and ensuring best practices and ensuring there's some quality control checks in place on those key systems is well worth the time and effort. And it makes that sort of integration process worthwhile long term because it reduces that risk of having multiple RMM systems.
Yeah. You have received PE funding yourself. When you want to buy another person, would you think about doing cash equity earnout? Where would you be? Are you open to all of the above, none of the above?
Yeah, good question. So the gentleman that I was mentioning, we had a conversation with that said, they wanted to retire and get out of the business within, 6 months or even less. That would have been, say, a 100% deal. So 100% cash deal. Let's say they have good agreements in place and all that backs up, then that's something that we would consider. So I would say that we're not sort of rigid in this sort of framework of it's got to be a 70-30 deal or a 60, 40 deal or 100% cash. It's ideally, I guess, there is no really ideal, deal for us, right? It's sort of what that business owner is comfortable with and what their goals are moving forward, for sure. But we would consider all of the above and work with that business owner to make this work, right? So if they don't have good agreements, we talked about that earlier, having a good MSA and good statement of services. If they don't have good agreements in place or their clients are month to month, but there's a good business there, we're probably going to have that discussion of an earnout, right? Because what other lever can we use in that scenario?
Yeah.
But for the most part, I think most of the MSPs that are listening, if this is something that that resonates with them a little bit, it would probably be a little bit of a hybrid approach where it's a percentage of equity that's rolled into the business moving forward and a percentage of cash. And that's assuming that the MSP checks off all the boxes we talk about best practice, with best practice, but it's very straightforward, right? Good customers, good team. That's really all you need.
That guy you were talking with last month who was talking about potentially exiting over the next 6 months, did that go anywhere?
So we're still in discussions.
Okay.
We're still in discussions, but we'll see how things go as we get into the new year.
Yeah. Very good. Let's wrap this up. I have one more question to ask you. So much conversation about AI and how that's going to disrupt the IT world. Where do you see the future of IT services in this, emerging AI world?
So it's a great question. I think the AI has come to a point where if you wanted to today, right now, you could probably add an MSP or start an MSP, add an existing MSP or starting a new MSP. You could probably get AI to a point where you have it integrated to answer the phone call, log the support ticket, provide a very basic, brief response, and you could build AI into your help desk ticketing system and shoot off responses to customers. So, I mean, I guess, long term, there could be some augmentation there and help for the existing team to help support and facilitate those requests. But it sort of removes the customer service element out of the equation. And at the end of the day, it's the most, in my opinion, it's really the most important component of the business, is that we need to maintain that level of customer service and customer focus and provide that white glove support. So for us, we're using AI as much as we can in the back end, but not so much on the front end, if that makes sense. So
yes, it does.
We want to use it to, empower our team, documentation. Anna submitted a ticket because she's having this problem with this system, and all that information is in the PSA, but we're using AI to be able to tell the technician, hey, Anna submitted this ticket, but she also submitted the ticket 3 days ago. This is a repeat ticket. And also Mary submitted a ticket 10 minutes ago for the same issue. All that information is in our PSA with a couple of clicks here or there. But if we can just get it all in one place and provide like sort of a brief summary, a debrief for the technician, I think that's a practical use of AI for us.
That's a fantastic response. I really like it. Doing a better job of using the unstructured data that you have to give a proper report for the person who then responds. I tell you what, like I just 2 days ago made a bunch of phone calls and left voicemails on people's phones, and some of them gave me back responses on my phone, which were like text messages. I was really impressed. I thought this person was actually writing back to me saying, "Can you call me back?" I am willing to bet those were automated text messages that came back to me, because there was no follow-up on the back of that, right? It was just, "Can I call you back?"
Right.
And now I'm less than happy about this. I would rather not have received any response at all.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's exactly your point, and I think that's a really, really good one. Can't replace the human being, because ultimately we're in it for the human touch. Sean, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time and for your insights and for putting up with all my questions. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Really appreciate having me on today. And I think we had a great discussion, a lot of good points. So yeah, it was great.
Thank you so much.
Take care.